Okay, so this is my most recently finished project. It was a bit of an experiment piece, not only in the actual stitch pattern that I worked it in, which is actually quite simple, but was worked corner to corner in this diagonal, but also as kind of a die lot and measuring or planning experiment. Basically, the thing here is every color block that you see, every stripe, is actually one full ball or skein, 5-ounce skein. So, like if you look at the corner there, you got a 6-inch ruler and a crochet hook, which is roughly about 6 inches as well. Could actually fit, you know, almost three of those across in the corners, whereas, you know, by the time, you know, kind of like working in a granny square, you know, the more rows you do working out, the more material you use, and therefore have to be a little more careful with how you space out your coloring. So that's kind of the other little experiment there. Obviously, here at the center stripes, it's well, before I had actually washed it, it was only measuring about 5 inches, but now that it's stretched out and relaxed a little bit, it's getting out there to almost 6 inches. So like I said, the stitch pattern that I did this in is actually very easy, and I'll get to that in a later time. The main thing that I wanted to get through here was the actual die lots, and as it worked out, you know, this was, like I said, being an experiment piece. Basically, the first two and last two color blocks or stripes were completely different die lots as the middle four, as it was like these two middle stripes of each color were the same die lot. Spreaded it out to have a different die lot of each of the colors here, and then the same in the beginning corner, which is actually at the top right now. And just to kind of show you an example of why that is, here you can see a few of my notes. A little better explanation, you know, here's my colors and their corresponding die lots there, if the autofocus would work. And in case you're wondering, the lighter blue, they were both the Red Heart Super Savers. The lighter blue and purple was the color Ocean, and the more greenish purple with the little yellow flecks was the Monet. I think that this was at one point called Artist Print, which is a color that I had a while back and actually ran out of on a piece. So, you know, just the most important thing if you are using die lots is to try to make sure that you get enough at the same time, because there are a few instances, and this is also just to kind of show you how Red Heart in particular has changed their, see, this was working earlier, has changed their labeling. The color number will pretty much stay the same. Occasionally they do discontinue certain colors to make room for new colors, and then up here in the right corner you'll see the actual die lot number, and then they've actually started time stamping with the manufacturing date and time, which is kind of nifty. So, you know, and then see that first one there was a 1930 Ocean die lot, and this one here is actually the 0150. So just to kind of give you an idea that, you know, I basically got lucky that these die lots were pretty much the same, but having a couple other examples where sometimes that's not the case. This is an example of how you may have used to have seen the Red Heart labels. This is actually a no dye lot color, a solid color, carrot. It's that orange kind of pumpkin-y color, but their actual pumpkin color looks more like a road cone orange, which I have both of those, oddly enough. And then again, here's the new label of the same thing, and again the color number is still 256, and they have a code number on here, but it's not an actual dye lot. That would probably be more based on like when you go to the paint counter at a hardware store and they have a specific code or recipe for a certain color. You give them the swatch, and that's basically how they would mix it. And again, with the timestamp and manufacturing, and I do apologize for this autofocus here. And here's another one that is of the old style of how they used to label the dye lots. This is 942 melon berry, and the dye lot here used to be a real long number, which occasionally a lot of manufacturers will change how they do their dye lot labeling, and as you can see, this one was 6320, and then the more specific numbers on the end there, and that was just another. And then just to give you an example of, this is actually Hobby Lobby's personal, I guess, store brand, I guess, of yarn. It's called I Love This Yarn, I Love This Wool, I Love This Cotton. And just an example of how they label theirs. They have again the color name and number, which is, this one was 804 Surprise Stripe, and then the dye lot number above that for 6508, which is actually this one here. It was a stripe pattern, and again, this is basically the first experimental piece of this stitch pattern, and this was only three skeins, 3 balls, but it's just to kind of give you a better idea of how that working on the diagonal kind of worked out with this. And this one is kind of funky because I only had the 3, and so I had to be really careful about how far I worked it up before cornering it off, and I still ended up with just a little bit. So that's kind of the secondary rule with dye lots. These last 2 rows were done in just a solid black for those 3 corner pieces, and the heather gray for the row right above that. Honestly, obviously, if I get that far in a piece, I'm not going to rip out over half, nearly 2/3 of it, just to make that corner, make that last few stitches. And then here is another color. This one I made. It was actually my first piece to ever be made and finished. As you can see, it's kind of the pastel baby rainbow. So this is one of the colors that is just a really good example of how dye lots can really affect, not so much on this particular piece, but I have seen some of these baby rainbow colors where, like, just looking at the shelving, how they have them on the shelf, you'll have maybe one that has a little more of the blue and purple, or one that has a little bit more of the pink. And I even saw one where the store only had maybe 2 that were kind of this really even tone, but then they had like 5 that were almost green with these little other color highlights. And it may work at some point, but for some people, but that heavy green didn't really work for me on that one. However, this is just another example where all these 3 variegated patches were the same dye lot, were the same color, but as you can see, just the way, for whatever reason, either the way I was working the stitch or at what point I started on the I guess in the patterning, like if I had started on this one, I started with a gray, which went right into the pink, which went right into the black, kind of set it off with this half light, half darker bit. But you know, possibly maybe if I had started with, you know, maybe in the middle of the black, it may have been a little bit more even. But again, I wasn't really worried about it at the time. So again, just to show you that a little better, you know, this is very, very random looking on this, what was the first striping, and then these last two seem to kind of overlap themselves, where it's obvious, you know, this kind of mid-tone blue-green, black, the mid-tone, the black, and then of course, and then later on, it's the mid-tone, the light gray, mid-tone, light gray, and again, down on this side. So it was just one of those odd items where, you know, sometimes, you know, just having the same dye lot is not necessarily going to get you the same results every time. You know, to quote Meatloaf on that ripple back there, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, and you know what, it's comfy. I love the pattern overall. You know, totally original thought up pattern that I'm aware of. Not to say that somebody may have something similar, but you know, and again, just to show you these last few real quick, and that's the end of the dye lot information. Thanks.